IVT's Validation Week returns in person this October, and it'll also be held virtually. This is the gold standard event for quality and validation professionals. Prepare to zero in on proven strategies for achieving regulatory compliance and educational training with top industry experts to ensure quality across the life sciences. Taking place in a hybrid format, in person October 19th to 21st in Philadelphia, and virtually October 26th to 28th. You'll have your top concerns addressed by key opinion leaders and benefit from benchmarking and knowledge sharing on the most critical topics in process validation, computer system validation, cleaning validation, equipment qualification, data integrity, and much more. This uniquely formatted event provides opportunity for all to gain the necessary training and discuss the most crucial topics in validation today. Plus, you can earn GMP training hours while attending. Validation Week 2021 is an event you cannot afford to miss. Visit informaconnect.com/ValWeek for full details on the agenda, registration, and team rates.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Risk Revolution, a monthly series of the Voices in Validation podcast brought to you by the IVT Network. The goal of this series is to advance the maturity of risk management practices within industry by covering topics that challenge quality professionals to seek opportunities to improve and advance the ways in which they perceive and manage risk. This week, our series lead, Nuala, invites a regular IVT contributor and industry disruptor, Karen Ginsbury, to innovate and revolutionize about the future of quality management within the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical sectors. So welcome, Karen, and Nuala, great to have you back again, as always.
Oh, thanks so much, Stacey. It's great to be here again. And in the spirit of our podcast title, Risk Revolution, we're really delighted to have Karen here with us today to shake up the paradigm and look to the future. And we're going to spend some time exploring some maybe not so revolutionary ideas, but some much needed common sense about quality management within our sector and within our industry. So, in our last episode, we were exploring the risk knowledge infinity cycle, or the Lipa loop, as we called it, with Marty Lipa, where he outlined with us how critical it is that organizations really integrate the ICH Q10 enablers by managing and, most importantly, utilizing what we know in our businesses in order to prevent and reduce risks to the patient. And of course, that also reduces risk for the business. So for regular listeners of the Voices in Validation podcast, who may have heard Karen's last podcast in April of this year, you might be concerned that I've just let the genie out of the bottle by mentioning ICH Q10 in the opening minutes. However, I have to admit that this really is music to my ears, given that I walked away from a well-paid job in 2010 in order to go back to college and do a PhD, really out of frustration with the lack of adoption within our industry of those sound quality and risk management principles that other industries have been embracing for decades. And, listening to Karen's last podcast, where she was really questioning, why do we have to be the special card of Pharma 4.0, and we'll talk more about that today, and why do we have to have a pharmaceutical quality system when #QMS is available for every other industry. And my thesis at that time was protecting the patient, enhancing the quality of pharmaceutical products. I really was trying to examine a means to provide, better protection for the patient through developing sustainable strategies for enhancing the quality of pharmaceutical products. And at the heart of the research, I asked of the ICH Q initiatives, and I'm going to quote directly from my thesis. I laugh because mostly it's just a doorstop now at this stage, but nevertheless, what remains to be seen is whether the industry and regulators can deliver the necessary practical changes on the ground to match the transformation that has occurred in their combined strategic thinking. So can they together enable a real transition in the development, manufacture, and supply of pharmaceutical products from a compliance-led model for quality to an excellence-led model that puts the patient and not the rules first? So that was the question I was asking back in 2014. So in the interest of putting our patients and of course the businesses as well first, let's not look back at the potential shortcomings in terms of the interpretation of the rules. But today I'd like to spend our time looking forward at what disruption and innovation and adaptation offers, not just to shift the paradigm, but maybe to break the cycle of how things get done around here in our sector. So welcome, Karen. We're absolutely delighted to have you and your conscience with us today. Over to you, Karen.
Thanks so much, both of you, Stacey and Nuala. Nuala, music to my ears. Really, there does seem to be some major issue in my self-perception, because I'm going to have to do some introspection on that, because I don't think of myself as a disruptor. I think I'm one of the most conservative people on this planet. I think it's hard to find anybody who is more risk averse and change averse than I am. However, having said that, over the last 2 years through COVID, I did move, and not only myself and my husband, but also with my mother, from one city to another city. So that was a pretty major thing for me after 24 years. So there you are. I never really even considered myself a force or an advocate for change. Certainly not a revolutionary. I think it's Deming who says that you should avoid revolutions in quality. And I really believe that very, very much. But you did mention my conscience, and my conscience won't be clean unless I do everything in my power. And I think I found a soulmate, Nuala, with you, to dispel the myth that pharma is different. We're not different. We are an industry. A quality management system is a quality management system. And I totally agree about moving forward. Thanks to you and your thesis, I may have to read your doorstop. That may be something that I need to do. But thanks to you, I had an epiphany, and the epiphany was, why are we again doing it and talking Pharma 4.0 instead of Industry 4.0? Industry 4.0 is about connectivity and the industry of things, and it is the only way forward as far as I can see. And that's not speaking as somebody who is intrinsically, I'm not the generation of, being born swiping like that, like the little 2-year-olds are nowadays. And I'm not the generation of mobile devices. I gave up my iPad. It was a bit difficult to do at the time, but I gave it up because I just found too much time was going on it. And I have an iPhone, but that's really, it's still on my conscience. But the thing about my conscience is that before I retire, I would really like to hear the pharmaceutical industry, regulator and industry as one, acknowledge we aren't different. And if other industries, as you very rightly pointed out, have been doing risk management and knowledge management for so long, then why aren't we doing it? My own belief, as far as both of those is concerned, is because we haven't adopted Industry 4.0, and now we really have to think about moving forward. And I think that we need to learn, we need to apply. If Elon Musk could do it, if Jeff Bezos could do it, and Kira Radinsky, who, by the way, I'll talk about her a bit later on, but they've given us, through disruption, they're the real disruptors, the use of big data, and signal tracking. So let's drop the pharma. I think that's basically what your thesis says, Nuala, even though I haven't read the whole thing or any of it. Patient and business case. Let's plead patient and business. Patient already pleads regulatory risk. In other words, if the activity is going to be harmful to the patient, then we must control it and make sure that it isn't harmful to them. And with that, we go back to hashtag QMS. And any effective working model of a QMS serves regulator and patient alike. And that's where we need to go.
Brilliant. Well, let's get started then, Karen. And you've straight off the bat, you've clearly stated that for you, the need for ICH Q10 or even pharmaceutical quality system is not there. So, in terms of the basis of the quality management system, hashtag QMS, as you say, and that far more enlightened standard ISO 9001, particularly the 2015 edition. Talk to me about some of the key strengths in that 2015 ISO 9001 and how they might offer a path forward for the global biopharma sectors and indeed, the other related health tech sectors, which are much more akin to looking at their big data now in terms of connected health. Those disruptors are embracing data as part of their actual business plan, as their strategy for route to market. We're still lagging behind, pulling that bag of data behind us like a dead weight, but we're not using it to drive our insights forward. So talk to me about some of the positives that ISO 9001 offer as a robust QMS, effective QMS.
So I think the real what's the word? The point of it is when it talks about the objective of a QMS, and the objective of QMS is preventive. Therefore, we come to my next hashtag, which is kill Kappa, because Kappa's dead. Kappa does not appear in ISO 9001 2015. They say the concept of prevention is built into the quality management system. That is risk-based thinking, it is management of processes, and it is decisions made, to me, based on big data. And that's where we, as you very rightly say, fall down every time. The concept of prevention, that's the main part of the QMS. And if you'll notice, I think in the introduction, Stacey spoke about the pharmaceutical industry and the biopharmaceutical industry. And well, I will share the secret. I hope you will forgive me for this. But in the when we were discussing this, so we've mentioned medical devices. So people might ask, why are medical devices not there? I could very well put in combination products, and companies who are struggling with combination products. Why are they struggling? Do you know how many clients over the years have come to me and said to me, we've got one quality system, a pharmaceutical quality system for our drug, and we've got a different quality system, which is ISO aligned, because 13485 2016 basically is the same for our medical device. And then the combination product is sort of this kind of yucky sort of interweaving of them. Why? We have to ask ourselves why. And ISO 9001 2015 gives us an effective model for a quality management system, provided we adopt it using the process-based approach. If we move to industry 4.0, you've got inputs and outputs. Anything that has an electrical signal and as an input can be monitored, controlled, and affect the output. And it seems to me that's the only way to go.
Yeah. And you talk about knowledge management as well as part of that. And I know in our earlier discussions in getting prepared for this, you talked about the smart factory that, the likes of Novartis are innovating with. And some of those, the big 10 pharma companies have got the deep pockets to invest in this. I know Amgen have a huge data science and data analytics program as well. But what did the rest of us do?
So that's the question. That really is the question. And to this day, including last week when I was doing workshops, if I ask a group, doesn't matter what size that group is, how many of your companies use electronic laboratory notebooks? I start out with a QC lab. That's usually around 0. And then I say in R&D, I'm begging you, R&D, I'm not even talking QC, because QC, data integrity, validation, and the bar is so high. But even in R&D, get one or two little hands going up tentatively. Yeah, we're just trying them out. I've been asking that question for at least 10 years, and the percentage isn't going up, whereas the cost of electronic laboratory notebooks is going down. And I'll tell you another little secret that people won't believe. They will not believe it in our industry. And that's where we need to break down the barriers. People will not believe me if I tell them that the companies, they need to hear it from the likes of Melissa Seymour from Biogen, and I can't remember the name, but in Gilead, and those companies who are way down the line with their visions of smart QC labs, at least smart QC labs and no standalone equipment, that the number of regulatory observations relating to data integrity shrinks to almost nothing, and inspections become a pleasure. And the same, that's absolute mirror image with electronic batch records and logbooks and so on and so forth. You can't do big data without them.
And of course, I mean, there is that thing about that, the benefits of having, an autonomous system, paperless system. So you're eliminating a lot of the pitfalls that we have, the potholes that we design into our paper-based systems. As we now like to call them, preventable errors as opposed to human errors, because in my view, we allow the humans to make the errors because we've designed the systems with loopholes in them every which way, enabling them to fall down.
You are so correct. You are so correct. In Jewish law, there's a principle called not placing a stumbling block before the blind. The meaning, obviously, being that you don't trip someone up deliberately. The paper-based, and it took me a long time to get there. It was about 5 years ago. I think I heard Madeleine Dole from Novartis speaking about computerized, and suddenly I said, Karen, you idiot. All these years, here's you been thinking, because I heard it bashed into me over and over again. Paper is safe, computerized systems, validation, too complex, stay with the paper and everything's okay. But forging a paper signature or tearing up a sheet of paper and placing it with another one is so much easier than forging an audit trail. So yes, of course there have been data integrity issues with HPLC systems. Nevertheless, once you get onto integrated systems without standalone equipment, it becomes collusion that you need between more than one person in the organization and serious hacking skills. And that takes away the stumbling block. The opportunity isn't there, and 90% or more of crimes are due to opportunity.
Yeah, and we talk about the triangle, the fraud triangle, in terms of rationalizing, but opportunity and capability to do that. But even coming back to where I started out, what's good for the patient, we might be thinking in terms of that data integrity, ensuring that the data that underpins the quality of their product has not been interfered with in any way. But for the business, it's much more efficient for them to have electronic notebooks and electronic batch records. It's much more efficient. The number of laboratory incidences and errors, those human errors, the number of did not follow the SOP
You're sure about that, deviations. You're sure that it's not more efficient for people to take a thermal printout and go and take a photocopy of it and stick it manually into a notebook and to sign half on the edge and put the data? Are you sure that's not more efficient? Because a lot of companies seem to think it is.
I know, and that's the issue, that we haven't, as well as not having embraced all of the hashtag QMS drive that other industries have done, we equally have not been, we've been laggards in terms of adopting really operational excellence type philosophies of reduction of waste. When you look at lean, I know there's been a huge drive around lean labs, but I was lucky enough to interview Jim Womack, the father of lean, as part of my doctoral research, and he despaired at the pharma industry ever growing up enough to recognize some of the opportunities that lean lean offers, as opposed to, you know, seeing it somehow as cutting corners. You know, whereas he really, you know, the essence of what the lean philosophy is all about is about reduction of waste, of making sure that flow of the value flows to the end user, the customer, our patients, and of course that flow, that value flows through the business. But that's me getting my OpEx hat on. I'm interested
about it, Nuala. You can't separate it. That's the big mistake that comes of saying that pharma is special.
No, and listen, Karen, you're absolutely. I mean, the essence of my PhD was about the fact that we've got to integrate a culture of learning with our knowing, doing, being. So using what we know, this was my framework. Using what we know, our knowledge management, to inform what we do in terms of our operations.
Yet. We haven't
even gotten there. Yeah, but in order to achieve. In order to achieve that being excellent piece of demonstrating our behaviors and also setting targets and all of that. But coming back to this, does this embracing more electronic based systems and connectivity and the Internet of Things and harvesting our knowledge, will that enable us to be much better about our data-driven decision making, our risk-based decision making?
Well, let's take a look at things. Let's consider that you've got your critical process parameters on your inputs, which affect the output, right? Which is the critical quality attributes, all the quality attributes, and how your product does or doesn't meet specifications. It's all about controlling the process. It's not about controlling the product, right? If we can control the process reproducibly, which is also about reducing waste, because controlling the process means there is less waste inherently, then we're going to do a better job of that. So if we are getting real-time signals, take something like mean time between failures on equipment, right? How many pharmaceutical companies are following that up and using it for predictive maintenance? Intel have been doing it, I don't know, maybe for 20 years. But no, either we've got a discrete, that's already advanced, if we've got a discrete computerized system for work orders, but usually, no, the technician takes this manual document with him into the area, he does whatever he needs to do, and then let's be honest, he goes back to his office and he puts little check marks which are even joined up so you can see that he did it all at the same time in his office. What information do you get from that? You're just not getting the information. Integrated information, big data, the sort of thing that happens, and I've said it, I think, sure, I've referred to it in other podcasts. I know I've mentioned it at IVT, but Target sent maternity vouchers to a 16-year-old girl. Her father went ballistic, called up Target. Of course, they apologized profusely and sent all sorts of gifts. And what? Our system's gone berserk. We can't understand this, etc., etc., etc. 2 months later, follow-up call. Father says, don't need to apologize. Turns out there's things going on in this house that I didn't know about. Now, how could it be that he didn't know, the girl didn't know either, that she was pregnant, but Target knew she was pregnant? They knew because they have algorithms which study the patterns of usage of mobile devices, the sites that are visited by pregnant women in the first trimester of pregnancy. And this girl, who had no idea she was pregnant, was using the same patterns. But we see the same deviation time after time after time, and we write down human error because we don't have data.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And just even on that example of the maintenance record, you know, our for years our focus of our quality management system has been about being inspection ready. So having those records available and ready for inspection, rather than harvesting the knowledge and the insights that are involved in those records, and whether it's a deviation or a maintenance record. And so And and of course that leaves us in this kind of reactive death spiral of firefighting rather than a proactive fire prevention. And predictive analytics, which is really what you're talking about there, it's about harvesting what we know to predict through the use of analytics what can be used going forward. So what are your top tips then to shift us from this kind of reactive bias to a much more productive action-based bias moving forward?
So first of all, I very much agree with you about inspection ready. And I'll come to that, and I'll even add it on. If I had to look, first of all, I really agree about putting the interest of the patient first. And I think if you see what's happening with drug shortages, then you can see that that's a side effect of over-regulation, over heavy-handed, going in, and that results in this inspection-ready defensive model rather than a proactive model. I think we need to do away with standalone equipment. I think companies, you need a vision for this. I mean, one has to be very careful. You can't obviously just go into this. There needs to be a company vision for it. And I heard at IVT, twice at IVT, from companies who are doing the smart labs, that you're looking at a minimum of 5 years. So companies who don't have the vision now, we're in 2021, well down the line, almost 2022. So looking at 2027, Elon Musk says that any organization that by 2030 isn't fully paperless, fully electronic connected, total connectivity will be irrelevant. And I believe that. I don't think that is a bombastic statement. I think it's logical. It's the logical continuity from where we are now. So that means that where are these electronic laboratory notebooks? Where are these electronic batch records? I worked in Teva. I can mention it because, confidentiality, I think after 34 years is, past. And the factory, in particular factories where I worked don't even exist anymore. But they were talking about electronic batch records in those days. How many companies have truly electronic batch records? Why don't we have drones to pick up samples from production? And a drone costs, between $10 and $25 nowadays. Why don't we have drones to pick up samples from the production area and take them to the laboratory? They're barcoded samples. They are automatically transferred to the system by this connected equipment, not into a LIMS system, into an electronic laboratory notebook system. There's no human intervention. The samples won't get lost. Drones don't get lost. Only people get lost. And if you think that these things, you don't, I can see, but I mean, a lot of people, when I talk about it, I think I'm a little bit mad. But Uber is already carrying out a trial in, they were before COVID even, on pilotless, helicopters, drones, to transport people in Lower Manhattan. Of course, there's regulation around that and whatever, but these things are possible. Merck has run a trial for delivering drugs to remote areas with drones. So none of the technologies exist, but we need a vision.
No, that's for sure. And here in Ireland during the pandemic, we've had medicines delivered to our offshore islands with drones on a pilot study, and that's the intention, that they're picking up critical medicines and getting them to remote areas. So I'm absolutely with you. And something like sample management is ripe for the plucking for disruption, because it causes so much hassle in terms of resources and scheduling and all of the things that go on.
Custody.
Yeah, chain of custody.
Yeah. So there is no chain of custody, because you can use blockchain technology to imprint it, so you know exactly what has happened and where it's gone, and there's no humans involved. There's humans involved in designing the systems. We're not, getting rid of the people. But we need to change our recruitment as well. We need to change our recruitment, because we need the geeks. I don't know if you're familiar with Kira Rudinsky. Kira Rudinsky is Miss Big Data. She was the chief technology officer for eBay. And Kira gave a lecture to our local branch of PDA, the Israel chapter, a couple of years ago. And she came in about 5 minutes before she needed to lecture, and she sat down with an iPad and a phone. And if you look, her thumbs actually are bent into the, from the speed at which she works with these devices and everything. Those are the kind of people we should be recruiting. I'm not saying Kira Rudinsky, but we need to look for the geeks. But we're getting more of the same. We're looking for little QA people who fit neatly into the niche of QA and keep taking their little forceps and picking data out manually from a handwritten batch record to do a product quality review. We've got to stop that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Kira Rudinsky is, as you say, not only Miss Big Data, but a famed data scientist. And
right.
Finally, we are starting to see that as a discipline in hiring. And certainly in the larger companies now, they've got data analytics and business information analysts working with the data scientists. And for me, it's not important about the fact that the data scientists don't come with a life science background, because that is something they will come to understand as they work with the different data sets. What they come with is a discipline of looking at patterns of data. And that's what Kira Rudinsky talks about.
Yes.
It's looking at those patterns, which is how she has innovated some of the work that she has done. And look, when we talk about that level of innovation, in fairness, awful and everything as it has been, and we've talked about it on this podcast before, the pandemic has been terrible in so many ways, but for the life science sector, it has offered us a pathway, a breakthrough pathway for acceleration on a whole host of fronts. I mean, looking at how quickly we innovated when it came to those vaccines, first in human trials, looking at the regulators and what they had to do in order to make that happen, looking at the companies and even the logistics. I mean, what were some of the aspects of innovation around the pandemic that really blew your socks off and said, gosh, this is something we've been waiting for 10 years?
I'm not sure that I can answer that, but what I can answer you is, or I can ask another question, because that's usually what we do. It's a very Jewish trait, is to always ask questions. And it's a good thing to do. It's not a bad thing at all. But the question is this: Pfizer, Moderna, Pfizer particularly, minus 80 degrees storage. Do you seriously believe that all of those storage units were calibrated, were qualified with temperature distribution studies and everything before they got those vaccines out to people? They weren't. So I think we need a dialogue in addition to companies being more daring. That's what I would say. I think companies need to be more daring, and I think they need to take regulatory risk. In other words, put the electronic laboratory notebooks in place, put the batch records in place. Maybe you will end up with some kind of a regulatory finding from a rather, in this case, I think it would be unpleasant inspector who says you didn't check box A or didn't look at box B when you were doing user requirement specifications. You still will come away with less data integrity findings. But then the regulator, on the other hand, remember how you could do it, where the benefit to risk, where the benefit was just so much greater to get those vaccines out. Plus there was political pressure, huge political pressure. So everything was relaxed. It was relaxed. And I'm not talking about giving up on things that matter, because we can't do that. We're an industry with risks, and those risks need to be managed. But what I am saying is, I think that regulators around the world need to focus on, in inspections, what really matters. In other words, there's a calibration sticker missing. So what? So what? Tell the company there's a calibration sticker missing, but don't write it up on the regulation, on the regulatory inspection, because they're going to spend time responding to it. You're going to spend time reading it, and that time could be used in innovation.
Yeah, and just in terms of some of the situations you're talking about, even if you look at things like you mentioned, we need to lower the bar around computer system validation to enable some of these systems to get into play, and to remove some of the fear factor that's there. I do believe that it's not just about the concern about regulation there. It's that as you've mentioned it, companies just haven't been risk takers. They haven't pushed the envelope. They've decided to sit back and sit behind the innovators and see what happens. But what happens there, what that results in is, of course, kind of inertia rather than any kind of innovation. So in terms of, the impact of data integrity and all of the prescriptive regulation that we've seen coming and guidance that we've seen coming out about that, or indeed, the really slow uptake. When we talk about electronic patch records and electronic signatures, 21 CFR Part 11 is now 21 years old, or older. It has the keys to the house now in the parlance, and yet we're still, as an industry, struggling to see that in the everyday.
But that we had it with Industry 3.0. Industry 3.0 was the introduction of computers, which, by the way, happened around the time that I was starting out in my career. And then we got Part 11, 21 CFR Part 11, and there was huge pushback because regulators started to say, oh, you have to validate every, field and everything and whatever. And there were requirements which could not be met at the time. They just could not be met. If you were going to make a simple change to a system, you were to check every other directory to make sure it hadn't been affected. In those days, there was not an algorithm, a computerized program to do that. Companies couldn't do it. So they said, fine, we'll stay with the manual systems. And they did. And that's why Excel is still everywhere. Excel is darkish data. Can't do very much with it because it's not part of a comprehensive system of any kind. And yes, it's a useful spreadsheet, but how many companies have a vision to eliminate Excel spreadsheets, which are not Part 11 compliant? So then there was regulatory relaxation. FDA actually put out a statement and they called some of their more aggressive inspectors off. They said, leave it. If companies want to use computerized systems, the benefits are greater than the risks, and therefore, certainly as far as secondary data is concerned, for example, as in data analytics isn't even collecting primary data, it's analyzing signals, right? And we do it for pharmacovigilance, we do it. So we've got to have some kind of a statement, I think, regarding Industry 4, that the benefits are so much greater than any possible risks that companies have to feel that this is got to be their comfort zone. Without it, they're going to go out of business. And we've got to start seeing smaller companies doing it. Strangely enough, startup companies, small virtual startup companies, tend to go that route because they simply do not have the manpower to allow them to set up those burdensome manual systems. So some of them do it, and they always, in my experience, do better in regulatory inspections.
Mm-hmm. And I know that, within the cell and gene therapy area now, where you've got all these highly innovative, very small, very agile startups, they have to embrace this. They just don't have the shelf life. They're looking at cold chain 48 hours or less,
right,
in some cases of arm-to-arm technologies, where they have to get that product direct, personalized medicine direct to the patient. So they just don't have the bandwidth to facilitate those burdensome decision-making processes and paper-based processes. They have to be agile by rote of the business that they're in. So, there's a lot that we're going to learn from those innovators as well as we move forward about the importance of timely and agile risk-based decision-making. And you do that on the basis of the knowledge that you have.
You do it based on having, yes, data. Data has to be analyzed, and that's the big data analytics in order to obtain useful information. And it's only useful when we apply it back to the systems. That's the whole concept of feed forward and feed back. But we almost force ourselves not to do it. Yet the technology is all there. We're all driving semi-autonomous cars. If you have a newish car, it has a mobile eye on it, and that mobile eye beeps if you are going over, you learn a lot about your driving through those cars, because it beats each time you drive over a lane division, right? If you haven't put your indicator signal on. And the newer models of those pull you back if you're on, they pull you back into the lane. So that's an autonomous artificial intelligence machine learning algorithm, which works. You mention it to people in our industry, and they're like, well, we can't let our machines make decisions. I'm not asking you to let them make the decision initially. Initially, you hold the decision in your hands. Even when you're driving, you hold it in your hands, because if you feel that pull, you can still resist it and say, no, I am going over there, and put your car over there. And you can also reset the mobile eye to be less sensitive or more sensitive, depending on your needs. But it works, and it's there. And we've learned about working remotely, you know, things that we were so petrified of, cloud and everything. And here we are doing this over Zoom. You know, we're not all together to do it, are we? We've got to go there. I would say electronic notebooks, electronic batch records, and no more purchasing standalone equipment. In other words, that doesn't mean that everything that you purchase from tomorrow will connect to an ELN or to an EBR, but it will be capable of connecting. It will have the connectivity so that when your company is there in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, whenever your vision envisages that in a controlled manner, you can connect them up. And you tell your purchasing department, you may not purchase standalone equipment that can't be connected. That's the vision. That's my message would be, take that to a management review meeting and get your executive management to sign off on a directive that they will not tolerate anymore, as of such and such a date, those kind of purchases. Or you will have to justify it on a one-off basis as the waiver.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you really, Karen, is your top three wishes. If I was well, we'll throw four in for you, seeing as you've mentioned four really key points that I see. First of all, you're absolutely right. It really requires starting with a vision from the top down and driving that right throughout the business, then creating that vision for interconnectedness, that industry 4.0. But with that vision has to come also the leadership putting the money where their mouths are, and actually investing both the capital and in the human capital that's needed to run a business in that way, in terms of the human capital that's needed. Secondly,
sorry, just before we go on to the second item, that if you do a very simple ROI, return on investment for that, I've heard of companies who've done it. Your return on investment takes 3 years, and then you are ahead on the game and saving, more profitable and much more efficient than any other company. You're going to put them all out of business. That's the model. That's the incentive.
So secondly, then, as part of that vision, it's ditch the standalone equipment. Make sure that everything has the capability of being connected, and have a strategy around getting that connectivity there. Of course, there's no point in having the connectivity if we're just harvesting all that data into a data lake that we do nothing with, which is also happening in our industry. The third thing I heard you talk about then is really, you know, when you say ELNs, EBR, it's really about embracing all electronic records throughout the business. So whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's electronic EQMS, electronic batch records, electronic lab information
if I can
system.
just add a note of caution. A note of caution. Nobody loves me for this, certainly not the manufacturers of the electronic QMSs. The electronic QMSs have severe limitations. I know that a lot of them are working on them right now to try and expand them to incorporate electronic batch records, but a lot of the electronic QMSs integrate dark data. You scan documents in, or you scan in PDFs or emails or whatever it is, and that data becomes dark data that cannot be used. So if you are going to go, we need a knowledge management system, and a company, as part of their vision, has to have, to my way of thinking, a VP of information technology who is responsible for this industry 4.0 vision. And part of that vision is a holistic knowledge management system, not knowledge management as an enabler. It hasn't enabled us, and we haven't enabled it. It's been a signal failure. So, but real knowledge management is what Target was doing, and is what Facebook does, and what Google does with the ads that they pop up to you the second that you've booked a flight somewhere, right?
Yeah. No, and I'm with you on that, because again, I don't believe it's because the capability and the technology isn't there. It's because of the conservative approach our industry has taken to this that we've ended up with a lot of electronic systems that are effectively paper to glass. We've just transitioned what is a paper system onto a glass tablet or a computer, but we haven't actually changed the work process.
You are so spot on, Nuala. We called it at the beginning an MMI, a man-machine interface, and then we called it an HMI because it became the right thing to do, a human-machine interface. And it isn't an interface at all. It is, as you very rightly said, no different at all to going and turning on a light switch, the way we use those systems. They are not interactive and not interfacing at any level. Get a printout and it's dark data.
Yeah.
And there's another point. Sorry, are we out of time? Shall I shut up?
Not at all. Keep going.
Oh gosh, senior moment. Heavy duty senior moment. Carry on. If it comes back to me, I'll say it.
Okay. Number 3, then I'm really hearing from you. If vision is number 1, number 2 is ditch the standalone equipment, get connected. Number 3 is making sure we have access to that electronic records and electronic data. And then the next one from that is really around recruiting geeks, as you called it, which is enriching the profile of our human capital so that we are encouraging people with those kind of data science, data analytics, statistics skills. And also what I would say is, as well as harvesting that whole discipline of data science and embracing those into the business and building them into the teams, not having them as a special ops group sitting off to one side, but actually integrating them into the operations and the laboratory teams. But I would also say that there's a huge need for us to embrace softer skills around critical thinking, around knowledge seeking, knowledge searching, those kind of softer skills that we need. We don't value those at the moment, and they're badly needed. Particularly,
it's not just that we don't value them, it's that if we were to bring in the geeks, we would sit them in an office and QA, and I'm sorry to say it because I'm a QA person and I certainly was overly conservative for the vast majority of my career. It took me a long time to understand the damage that was doing. And, if we would bring in the geeks, QA would put them in a box because they'd be so scared of them doing stuff that's not regulatory compliant. And a lot of this is shadow chasing, it's not real. So I think, Deming said in his 14 principles, didn't he? You have to drive out the fear. That was one of his 14 principles. We need to drive out the fear of Industry 4.0 and give a better understanding of it. The understanding is simple because everybody uses mobile devices. Everybody uses them and they are biometric. You can make them fully biometric. I audited a company just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, time passes fast at my age, and they had face recognition instead of card key access. You cannot pass your face to someone else if you're not there that day, so you've eliminated that data integrity issue which closed a facility in Spain because someone took the card of someone else and used it. And the same for approval of batch records and laboratory notebooks. One of the data integrity issues is I can fill in data retrospectively because it's paper. So I can do it. It's an opportunity. But if it's on a computer and it's audit trail, time and date stamped, I can't do that anymore. The opportunity is gone. And if it's put an alarm on it so that it pops up to QA, this is overdue with a huge red notification, it won't go more than a day over and companies become more efficient at doing that.
Yeah, brilliant. So listen, now that we've unearthed all of your top tips for disruption and innovation, do you have any closing thoughts for our listeners that we didn't hit on in our discussion so far today?
I think it's just really about wrapping it up. I do ask, I'm known to ask it regularly. Unfortunately, the answer for the most part is no. Does your company have an industry 4.0 vision? Answer no. How are we going to create that vision? What business case, strategic business case are we going to take to the executive management? And by the way, Elon Musk, 2019, Tesla going bankrupt in all the newspapers. And I took one look at it and I said, Elon Musk will be the richest man in the world. And he is now, 2020, 1 year later, right? So I don't think it takes that much to convince a forward-looking management. Holistic solutions. So not just an electronic batch record, not just no more standalone equipment. If we're going to get an electronic QMS, that's not going to replace understanding how a QMS works and putting prevention in place and using data analytics, big data analytics, to drive data-based, process-based, risk-based decision making. And we failed. As an industry, we have failed abysmally. We should recognize that. We should pick ourselves up and we should go forward, as you very rightly said at the beginning of this. Let's not look back. Let's look forward. The data is there. Let's start using it.
Yeah. And so, look, we have somewhere along the line, we've mentioned previously the opportunities, and maybe you don't agree with all of the work that they're doing, but there are coalitions of industry coming together to look for pragmatic approaches to given problems. And we've seen one such coalition coming together under the One Voice for Quality, where they're trying to overcome this ridiculous situation where we haven't had harmonized mechanisms of post-approval change. So we've seen that One Voice for Quality initiative come through, and I know Stacey, you've had 2 podcasts, I think, on that with Emma Ranmarine and the team there. So I guess from my perspective, you know, more of that, please. We've seen 30 companies coming together, 31 companies coming together there to really put their gene power together to look at pragmatic solutions and then working that through with the regulatory community. So I think, you know, no one company is going to win the day here. I think as an industry, we've got to work together and look at embracing and making that you know, coming up with those cases and that demonstrating that return on investment and collaborating together. And I think that's part of what we've seen through the pandemic is a level of collaboration across the industry, both, you know, within the industry sector itself, with the supply chain partners, you know, with the regulators globally, with the public health. We've seen that collaboration as a result of, you know, public health and politics coming together. And we need to continue to harness some of that as we go forward, because this is the kind of paradigm change that's needed. And when you're saying we're going to be out of business by 2030 if we're still pushing paper around with biros at that stage, it's such a short time frame away, only 9 years away. So we always try and have a few key takeaways for our listeners. So I'm going to link to in the show notes here, I'm going to link to the One Voice for Quality webpage, and they've got all of their publications and some of their rationale around what they've been doing around one particular problem for industry. And I think we've got 2 podcasts with that team as well, showing a little bit of where innovation has come into play. We'll link for those, Stacey, in the show notes if you think so. What do you think about that?
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean that they're one group that is trying to move the needle. You know, Karen, if you have any other suggestions for articles or websites that you think provide some additional research or ideas into the thinking that you have. I strongly
recommend you give a link to Elon Musk's recruiting video on YouTube.
Okay, we'll look for it.
because when I'll try and find it for you and send you the link. But when you look at it, what you'll find is initially you think that this is a pitch to shareholders. And at some point he says quite clearly, are you interested in this? then I'm interested in you. And can you please contact us because we want you to come and work for us? And, it's the paradigm change. And, One Voice for Industry is a crucial initiative. It's a crucial initiative because we have to work as one. If we can't work as one, we're going to really find ourselves in trouble. The ICH Q12 and the PICS guide on change management takes us to more of the same. It takes us to micromanagement of the quality system and doesn't allow companies to be flexible, apart from which in Europe, the legislation framework isn't there. Yeah, the framework isn't there. Thank you for that. So that's a huge problem. And that's why I think that One Voice for Industry needs to have a frank and open discussion with regulators as one voice about what is really needed to bring Industry 4.0 on board. And I think we need some soul searching. I really do. I don't think we can carry on with more of the same. And I'm a quality person. So when I look at what's in that PICS guidance, which I can't pronounce the name on, what constitutes an effective PQS when making changes, that's not what it's called, risk-based, I don't know, the title alone really, it just raises my blood pressure. And then when I go into it and I look at everything in there, I say, yes, it's correct. Everything in there is correct. There is nothing in there that I don't agree with based on my experience in what is needed to manage change. But if we were to use process-based, risk-based thinking and management of the process, we would become OPEX lean. We would run the processes properly. I have a fantastic book, can't remember its title. I'll give it to you so you can reference it on the podcast, references, about someone who went into a company as the CEO. The company was failing, and he spoke to the shareholders about safety. And after the meeting, or even while he was talking, someone ran out, one of the shareholders phoned all his mates and said to them, "You've got shares in this company, sell them. The new CEO is nuts." And a year later, they were profitable. Why? What is safety about? It's about managing processes. So I don't think we can keep writing more guidances which address the pharmaceutical quality system. And more, and they overlap. We'll be so busy with the details, we can't possibly adopt visions.
Yeah. So on that note of adopting visions, we really do thank you for sharing your insights and sharing your visionary view today with us, or that of your conscience. If you're still in the conservative, change-averse, risk-averse mode, which I don't believe, at least your conscience is going to be clear and clearly visionary. So Karen, thank you so much for joining us on Risk Revolution today. And Stacey, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nuala, for heading up our Risk Revolution series. Excellent job as always. Thank you as well, Karen Ginsbury, for being our guest and sharing your insights. I also want to give a shout out to our producer, Ben Kitchen. And lastly, a huge thanks to you, our valued listeners. We are so grateful to you. If you enjoyed this episode, we ask you to subscribe in your podcast player of choice and share with your friends, colleagues, and online networks. And if you have topic requests or guest suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. For today's show notes and information on this podcast, including links to all the takeaways, please visit www.ivtnetwork.com/podcast. We'll be back again next week with another great interview. Until then, stay healthy and safe.